I still remember the very moment when one of my worst fears had actually happened to me. For several hours, I unknowingly shared a hotel room with a stranger. While I was sleeping, while I was in the shower. All that time, someone was in the hotel room with me, hiding somewhere. It happened in October 2023 while I was attending a marketing conference in Asheville, North Carolina. I had booked a small hotel near Tunnel Road, a busy commercial area, lined with restaurants, gas stations, and budget hotels, popular with travelers exploring the Blue Ridge Mountains. The hotel wasn't luxurious, but it looked clean, safe, and perfectly ordinary. After spending most of the afternoon at the conference, I returned to my room around 6 p.m. feeling exhausted. I answered a few emails, unpacked some of my things, and decided to lie down for a quick nap before dinner. I set an alarm for 20 minutes. When I woke up, something felt slightly off. I couldn't explain why. The room looked exactly the same. Still, I remember noticing that the bathroom door was closed. I was fairly sure I had left it open. At the time, I dismissed it as a mistake on my part. I got ready and headed out for dinner. When I returned around 8 p.m., I noticed the television was on. Again, I was almost certain I had turned it off before leaving. I stood there staring at it for a moment before convincing myself I must have forgotten. People forget things when they're tired. At least that's what I told myself. Around 10 p.m., I decided to take a shower. I left the bathroom door slightly ajar so I could hear my phone if it rang. About 10 minutes later, standing under the water, I heard a sound. A faint click. It sounded like a doorknob click. I froze. The sound seemed to come from somewhere inside the room. I shut off the water immediately. Silence. I waited. Nothing. After a few seconds, I wrapped myself in a towel and stepped into the room. The room looked exactly as I had left it. Still, my heart was racing. I checked under the bed. Nothing. Inside the closet, behind the curtains, nothing. Even the small balcony outside, nothing. No person, no movement, no explanation. Eventually, I convinced myself that it had probably been my imagination. Maybe another guest had closed a door nearby. Maybe I was just tired from traveling. I told myself there was a logical explanation, but despite all my attempts to rationalize it, I felt uneasy for the rest of the night. I kept glancing toward the closet. I checked that the door lock was engaged several times before going to sleep. Even then, I slept poorly. The next morning, the uneasy feeling hadn't gone away. Before leaving for the conference, I stopped by the front desk and told them what had happened. The employee seemed skeptical, but because I appeared genuinely concerned, the manager offered to review the hallway security footage. I honestly expected the footage to prove that I had imagined everything. Instead, it revealed something far worse. The video showed me entering room 418 after dinner. Hours later, while I was in the shower, the room door opened. A man stepped into the hallway. He quietly closed the door behind him, then calmly walked away. I remember staring at the screen, completely speechless. The timestamp was clear. The footage was clear. The man had not entered my room. He had exited it. The manager immediately recognized him. He was a maintenance employee who had been terminated several weeks earlier. For reasons nobody had noticed, one of his access cards had never been deactivated. An internal investigation later revealed he had been entering occupied guest rooms while guests were away. Sometimes he searched luggage. Sometimes he stole small items. Sometimes he simply remained inside the rooms. The footage explained everything. The television, the bathroom door, the strange feeling I couldn't shake. But one realization hit me harder than anything else. The man didn't leave until I was already in the shower, which meant that when I returned from dinner, when I answered emails, when I took that 20-minute nap, and when I showered with the bathroom door open, he was already there. Somewhere. possibly under the bed, possibly inside the closet, only a few feet away from me. The hotel manager apologized repeatedly. Thankfully, the conference was ending that day, and I only had a few hours left before checkout. I packed my belongings the moment I returned and left the hotel as soon as I could. A few days later, I received a formal apology from hotel management. They refunded my entire stay and offered several complimentary vouchers for future visits. I suspect they were worried about what would happen if the story appeared in an online review. I accepted the refund. I declined the vouchers. No amount of free nights could convince me to stay there again. To this day, every time I check into a hotel, I inspect the entire room before unpacking a single thing. Under the bed, inside every closet, behind every curtain. Just a piece of advice, if you are not already doing these when you get into a hotel room, you should. Just because a room looks empty doesn't mean you're alone. This happened when I was 16, during a family trip to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. We were staying at a hotel just off the parkway while visiting the Great Smoky Mountains. It was our second night there. Around 10 p.m., my mom realized she had forgotten her allergy medicine in our car. The parking lot was directly outside the hotel entrance, so she asked if I could quickly run down and grab it. I had done similar things plenty of times during family trips, so it didn't seem like a big deal. I took the elevator down to the lobby and headed outside. The parking lot wasn't empty, but there weren't many people around either. I found our car, grabbed the medicine from the glove compartment, and started heading back toward the hotel. That's when I noticed a man standing near the entrance smoking. As I walked past, he smiled and asked if I was enjoying my vacation. I didn't think much of it. I just said something like, "Yeah, it's been good." I expected the conversation to end there. Instead, he started walking beside me. He asked where I was from, how long we'd be staying, whether this was my first time visiting Asheville. The questions weren't necessarily strange, but something felt off. Maybe it was because I was alone. Maybe it was because he seemed way more interested in talking to me than most strangers would be. I gave short answers and kept walking. When we entered the lobby, I figured we'd naturally go our separate ways, but he followed me toward the elevators. That's when I really started paying attention. He wasn't carrying luggage. He didn't have a room key. He didn't seem to be heading anywhere specific. When the elevator arrived, we both stepped inside. I pressed the button for the 7th floor. He didn't press anything. At first, I thought maybe he'd forgotten. But after a few seconds, he just looked at me and smiled. Then he said, "7, huh?" My stomach immediately dropped. I didn't respond. The elevator continued upward. Then he asked if I was traveling with friends. I said no. Then he asked if I was alone. I told him my parents were upstairs waiting for me. For some reason, his expression changed slightly when I said that. The elevator reached the 4th floor. Nobody got on, nobody got off. The doors closed. We kept moving upward. Then he stepped closer. Not enough to touch me, but close enough that I became very aware of how small the elevator suddenly felt. He looked at the medicine bottle in my hand and said, "So your parents sent you down here by yourself?" At that point, I was done with the conversation. Something about the way he said it made every alarm bell in my head go off. The elevator reached the 6th floor. One floor before mine. The doors opened. Without even thinking, I stepped out. The 7th floor wasn't my destination anymore. I just wanted distance. The man looked surprised for a second. Then he stepped out too. The second I saw that, my heart started pounding. If he was staying on the 7th floor, he would have remained in the elevator. Instead, he followed me. I started walking quickly down the hallway. He followed. I walked faster. He walked faster. I remember looking over my shoulder and seeing him maybe 20 feet behind me. still smiling, still following. I immediately pushed open the stairwell door and started running. I didn't even care if it looked ridiculous. I ran up the stairs toward the 7th floor. A second later, I heard the stairwell door open behind me. He had followed me into the stairwell. That's when I knew I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. This guy was intentionally following me. I sprinted up the final flight of stairs, burst through the door onto the 7th floor, and ran straight toward our room. I started pounding on the door. "Mom! Dad!" The door opened almost instantly. My dad had been expecting me back for several minutes already. The moment I stepped inside, I turned around. The man had just entered the hallway from the stairwell. The second he saw my parents standing there, he stopped. For a few moments, nobody said anything. Then he turned around and walked away. Not running, not apologizing, just calmly walking back toward the stairwell. My dad attempted to run after him, but by the time he reached the stairwell, the man was already gone. My mom immediately called the front desk. They reviewed the cameras later and confirmed he had left the property through a side exit. Hotel staff was unable to identify him. Nobody matching his description was registered as a guest. To this day, I don't know what he wanted. Maybe he was harmless, maybe he wasn't. But I've never forgotten how quickly that encounter went from slightly uncomfortable to genuinely terrifying. And whenever someone tells me they're worried about being rude to a stranger who makes them uncomfortable, I always tell them the same thing. Trust your instincts, because mine may have saved me that night. I still remember the sound that woke me up that night. Not a knock, not shouting, just the faint rattling of a doorknob. The doorknob of the connecting door in my hotel room. This happened in the fall of 2023, when I was traveling alone for work. My company had sent me to Springfield, Missouri for a training seminar, and they booked me into a small hotel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't anything special, just one of those places you stay in for a couple of nights. The room looked normal enough. There was a queen-sized bed, a small desk by the window, a TV on the wall, and one of those connecting doors that leads to the room next door. I remember noticing the connecting door when I first got there, because I've never really liked them. Even when they're locked, something about them always makes me feel a little uneasy. Still, I checked the lock, dropped off my luggage, grabbed dinner nearby, and spent the rest of the evening answering emails. By around 10:30, I was exhausted. I turned off the lights and went to sleep almost immediately. At some point during the night, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. The room was completely dark and everything seemed quiet. I checked my phone and saw it was 12:47 in the morning. I was about to put the phone down when I heard it again. A soft click, then another. It took me a second to realize where it was coming from. The connecting door. Someone was turning the handle from the other side. I sat up and listened. The handle rattled again. My first thought was that the guest next door had made a mistake. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they'd had a few drinks. Maybe they thought it was their bathroom door or closet. Whatever the reason, it didn't seem like a big deal. The noise stopped after a few seconds. Everything went quiet again. So I laid back down. Maybe 10 minutes later, it started again. This time, it lasted longer. I could hear the handle turning over and over. Then I heard someone push against the door. That was when I started feeling uncomfortable. If someone accidentally grabbed the wrong handle once, that's one thing. But why keep trying? I got out of bed and walked closer. I stood there in the dark, listening. The handle moved again. Then I heard a voice, a man's voice. "Hello?" said the voice from the other room. I froze. A few seconds passed. Then he said something that immediately put me on edge. "Are you alone in there?" I started getting scared. There was something about the way he asked it. It didn't sound friendly. It didn't sound like someone needing help. It sounded like someone trying to find out who was inside. I didn't answer. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then I heard the handle again. At that point, I grabbed my phone and called the front desk. The woman working the night shift answered pretty quickly. I explained what was happening and asked if she could contact the room next door. There was a pause. Then she asked me what room I was in. After I told her, she sounded confused. She said, "The room next to yours shouldn't be occupied." I remember sitting there thinking I'd heard her wrong. "What do you mean?" She checked again. Then she said the room beside mine was listed as vacant. The second she said that, I felt every bit of sleep leave my body, because I knew I had heard someone. I definitely had heard a voice. I had heard someone trying the door. The woman told me she was sending security immediately. While I waited, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring directly at the connecting door. Every little noise made me jump. I kept expecting the handle to move again. A few minutes later, I heard activity in the hallway. Voices. Footsteps. Then suddenly someone started yelling. The shouting lasted maybe 30 seconds before everything went quiet. A few minutes later, the front desk called me back. The woman sounded shaken. She told me security had found a man inside the supposedly vacant room. Apparently, he wasn't a guest. Nobody even knew how he'd gotten into the hotel. From what they could piece together, one of the side entrances had been left unlocked earlier that evening, and he had wandered inside. The guy was heavily intoxicated. Security escorted him off the property and called the police. But honestly, that wasn't the part that bothered me the most. The part that bothered me was learning that he hadn't just wandered into the room and fallen asleep. Security found fresh scratches around the lock of the connecting door. According to them, it looked like he'd been trying to get through for quite a while. The hotel immediately offered to move me to another room. I accepted without hesitation. I don't think I slept more than an hour for the rest of the night. And ever since then, whenever I check into a hotel and see one of those connecting doors, I always make sure it's locked before I do anything else. Because all it takes is one person on the other side who isn't supposed to be there.